Welcome back, Gadgetarians. Today we're going to talk about the update process of the big three operating systems, Mac, Windows, and Linux, and which one has the best update process. Just a quick note, I have not decided which one is the best. So if you're thinking I decided Linux is the best, hold your horses. I got an idea. Let's try to make this as objective as possible. So what I've done is created a little chart here with what I think are probably the 5 most important features or benefits of the OS update process. So I've got process itself, which is the update method and system downtime. I've got automation. So how well do automated updates do in the operating system, and how easy is it to set up? We have ease of use, quality of the interface, access, overall design. We have adaptability. Can you change the user interface if you wanted to? Can you have selective updates? And then finally, reliability. What is the success rate of the update process? So what we're going to do is we're going to give a total of 10 points maximum for each of the categories. So we should have, if it was perfect for one OS, 50 points possible. Although this may be a little subjective, I do have experience, vast experience with all 3 operating systems, with Windows, with Mac, and with Linux. So I actually have not decided what points to give each OS in each category, so we'll talk about it. And then I'll assign the points I want to, and I'll be curious if you're keeping track. Just add up the points you would assign and give me some scores in the comments below. I'm very curious to see what you have to say. Okay, so let's start with the first one, the process. So one of the big pet peeves for me is the system downtime when you do updates. And of the 3, well, let's start with Windows, left to right. So the update method with Windows I find is really poor. 2 reasons. One, updates are automated. So when you go to shut down the system, and sometimes when you boot up the system, unfortunately, you may be forced into doing updates whether or not you want to. Now, there are ways around that, and we'll discuss that a little bit later, but simply the way updates are presented to you and the amount of time that you're down, to me, is pretty high, so that's problematic. I would prefer to have more control over my updates. Mac, on the other hand, I find it somewhat limited. So basically the update method, and I'll try to show a video here of my Mac, my particular Mac right now. After about 1 minute of having booted up, there are 2 notifications. One says there's a new operating system, Mojave, and there's a button for more information and install. And then another message comes up which basically says there are updates available for your system, and you can click install, or I believe there's a drop down arrow, and I always select the latest timeout, the farthest timeout I can go, which is remind me tomorrow. So not too awfully useful. The other factor is with the Mac is when you do the update. Problematic, because usually it requires a reboot, and when you do the reboot, unfortunately it can be some time, especially when it's doing an OS update. Same for Windows. When Windows is doing a major fall update or spring update, it can be quite time consuming, and if you're running your system on a standard hard drive and not an SSD, you're going to be waiting a long time. So before we go on, I want to give some points to Windows and Mac. So talking about the process, With Windows, well, I'm not a big fan of the update method, and the system downtime, in my opinion, is atrocious. So, looking at points, I would put 6 out of 10 points, which is like a D if you think of letter grades. Mac, it seems to have slightly less system downtime when you're doing the updates, and at least you can put it off for a day. And I realize you can with Windows as well, but we're going to discuss that in ease of use. So Mac is slightly better, but unfortunately you do have to have updates. And of course you have to have updates. But anyway, when you do the updates, there's going to be some kind of system downtime, but it should be brief. So we will give the process for Mac a 7. Now let's talk about Linux. Update method. Well, I'm actually not too awfully fond of Linux's update method, if you can believe it. Now, there are several different flavors of Linux. The ones that I'm talking about most commonly are the ones that use apt or they use DNF. So that's usually a command line interface, but depending on which desktop you're on, it's possible that you can access the updates right here. So we can use the graphical interface to install the updates, or we can use the command line and type in DNF. You would think the graphical update feature would be useful, and we'll talk about reliability in the future. The big problem with the usefulness of that particular feature is every desktop interface is slightly different. And the command line, of course, DNF is slightly different than apt. Now, there are other interfaces. So if you run Arch, which I have very little experience with, I believe it's AUR you use to do the updates. I'm sure somebody out there can correct me on that. But I've found that Linux, although the process is good, access, unless you're used to the command line, is questionable. The other factor, and this is a flaw of DNF, I don't know if anybody's noticed, but if you haven't, run DNF update and run System Monitor and watch how many threads, how many different cores are used when DNF is processing all of the different packages. You'll find it only uses one core. Now, there may be reasons for that, but personally, I find it really annoying because you've got, in my case, 8 cores, 16 threads, and one thread is used to process the updates. So with Linux, I actually feel that the method used to do the update and, well, I won't say system downtime, but basically the method is so-so. The process, I should say. You got the issue of interfaces changing depending on which desktop environment you're using. I want to say the complexity of the command line, even though I don't find it complex, I do get a lot of comments. And of course, the single-threaded interface when doing DNF updates. So unfortunately, because of that, I'm thinking, well, in its favor, system downtime is negligible. You can do all your updates and not reboot, or if you want, you can reboot immediately, and it's very, very fast. So because of that, I'm going to give Linux a solid C. One of the problems I have, and you're going to see as we go through these categories, is I'm really hard on the operating systems, all of them. So I honestly don't expect any of them to get higher than a B, but we'll see. Let's talk about automation. How well do the automated updates perform, and how easy is it to set up automated updates? Well, in the case of Windows, yes, the updates are automatic by default. you do have to dig and burrow into the operating system to find the settings you want to make a change so that you can delay updates during a certain time period, which is very nice. But I feel like the interface is a little bit confusing. I understand it, but I have to think about it a little bit. Now, of course, with the major updates of Windows, the interface tends to change, which I actually think is another downside because the changes are quite radical in the graphical interface. Some of you may disagree, but when you simply change the location of system updates, for example, and I know you can type in and do a search, just type in system updates, and usually it pops right up. Changing the interface radically does present problems, but in the case of Windows, the updates are automated and ready to go, whether or not you want them and whether or not you're willing to wait for those updates to complete. So in this case, I think Windows Update, what do you think? Ease of update hurts it. I would want to give it an 8, but I'm going to give it a 7 because of ease of setup for making changes to the automated features of the update process. I don't think it's easy enough. Otherwise, I'd give it an 8. You know, once you go into the OS and you learn how to do updates, you expect to find that, again, quickly, and you can't. Let's talk about Mac. Well, by default, automated updates are not turned on, but you can do automated updates. I personally have never done it. If I'm able to do updates manually and I don't have to let it do it automatically, I prefer to do manual. Now, the good news is you can prevent the reboot of the Mac OS when it does updates. So that's kind of nice. And when you click install updates, one of the things you can do is select automatic, so it'll automatically run the installer. So that's kind of a nice feature. And because Mac is actually running on FreeBSD, you can run the updates but not be required to reboot necessarily immediately. It's different when you're doing a major OS update, however. In that case, you are going to be downloading, installing, actually downloading, rebooting, and doing the installation of the major update. So when I think of Mac and automation and ease of setup, it's kind of right in your face because that install updates information will come up each time and you can say, remind me tomorrow over and over and over. You can also do automatic install of updates. So I feel like we have this really nice simplicity in Mac. It is the walled garden after all. And the operating system, the look of it and where you get access to that update doesn't change very much. So I really think in this case, Mac is probably right up there doing the best so far. Number 8. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10, so a solid B. This is one of the things that people who use Linux like to complain about is, okay, so we want to do automated updates in Fedora Linux, and it may be different for Ubuntu or Debian or Arch or whatever, but it's way overly complicated, and I've done some very basic research. So let's have you have a look. And this is according to Fedora Project Current. So Fedora 22 or later versions. So you want to use DNF Automatic. Let's make things a little bigger so you can read it. First thing you have to do, of course, is go to the command line, and they're not even telling you that you actually have to do a sudo. So you have to install the package for DNF Automatic. Then you have to do some editing of automatic.conf. You have to run DNF automatic and enable the timer in systemctl. You have to do a timer list, and there are some changes with Fedora 26. I'm sure it works fine, but as far as ease of use, this is pathetic. For me, it's not a problem. If I really wanted automatic updates, I would do it. The one thing I'm not sure about, having not done it before, is this thing going to reboot when they're done, or is it just going to do the updates, notify me, and I'm still able to use my system? That's one unknown quantity, but setting up automatic updates, the ease of setup, and the interface are so typical of Linux, and I'm pointing more towards Fedora-based, RPM package-based, DNF automated updates. So my experience with apt and other update tools is kind of narrow, so I'm pointing a little bit more to DNF style updates. This one, well, I'm actually going between an F and a D. Is it a complete fail? I'm going to go with no, because you can do it, and allegedly it will work fine. So I'm going to go with a 6, so a D. It's not easy to set up automated updates. The interface is awful, and it's not as straightforward in the graphical interface and easy to do. I'm sure there's a graphical interface tool you can download to do automatic updates. So if you're using Ubuntu, for example, you probably can do automated updates much easier, or Linux Mint or something like that. But in this case, I'm picking on Fedora and to some extent Linux in general. All right. Let's talk about ease of use. So here I'm talking about the quality of the interface, getting access to the updates feature, and overall design. So with Windows, I actually think in this case ease of use is very difficult. The operating system really changes too much. So how you get to system setup system updates, where the features are located, and the procedure changing, I feel like unless you're just going to go with automation, it's actually more difficult as far as ease of use goes with Windows. It's reasonable, but I don't feel it's really all that great. So what would I give ease of use in the case of Windows? Well, it's obtrusive as well. So honestly, in this case, I'm going to give it... Oh, this is so difficult. Am I being too harsh on Windows here? I know you're all saying, no. But we're trying to be objective. All right. I'm going to give it a 7. A C. Remember, a C is like barely passing. You know what I mean? It's right on the edge. What about Mac ease of use? Well, the OS does not change much. It's very glacial. The updates are right in your face. They show up on the right side of your screen. If you have a major OS update, it shows up. If you have minor updates, it shows up. It gives you some delay time if you want to delay an hour, I think a day, or install immediately. I find that functionality very simplistic. The one thing I don't like about Mac's updates and the design is you start working in your laptop or whatever device you have that's running Mac OS, and about anywhere from 3 minutes to 10 minutes later, poof, the update notifications appear in the upper right hand corner. So you're already kind of engaged in your work, and you have no choice but to either do the updates or somehow respond to what it's asking you. Do you want to install major OS update like Mojave? Do you want to install minor updates to your current operating system? Usually I've already begun working, so the answer is no, I don't want to do the updates right now. I really think that Mac is the best, though. The only issue is the time lag when those updates are presented. So in this case, I'm going to give Mac a 9 out of 10. My first 9. Finally, 90%. So right on the edge of a B and an A. Linux. Ease of use. Depending on what desktop interface you're using, you have a choice. Well, you have a choice anyway, no matter which DE you're using. But in this case, I'm using Plasma. Well, I can just simply click the Install Updates arrow here and do software updates. So it looks like I have 147 new updates. I have not done the updates yet, even though we're on Fedora 30 here, so we've done a major OS update using DNF. But in this case, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and do a graphical update. Here's the issue, at least with Plasma. When you do the graphical update and click Install Updates, about 30% of the time, I have it just simply fail. So it runs into a package that it doesn't know what to do with, and I don't know why, because you think it would just be accessing DNF in the background. It'll display an error message, and it sometimes will not continue doing the updates, and other times will skip several packages. And if you try to do those updates again, the software update or the GUI interface, this piece of it just crashes. Now, I haven't done it in Fedora 30, so I'm hoping things have changed, but quite frankly, I don't know what to think. So you can use the graphical interface, or you can use the command line. So you have two methods that you can do updates. Now, it's possible you can do that in Mac as well. And to be honest, you probably could do it in Windows. The command line is very, very, very complicated and can basically access everything in Windows. But most people are not going to write a script to do automatic updates. I say most people. I'm not talking about administrators that are working for a business or enterprise environment. So the quality of the interface, we shouldn't have a problem with the GUI. We should be able to run it, do the updates, be happy, and carry on. Access, excellent. You have the command line. You have a graphical interface down here. As far as Plasma goes, changes are very subtle. So this interface here is going to be here and has been here for me for version after version after version. So Plasma's kind of, KDE I should say, has kind of figured out with this Plasma desktop interface, subtle changes are much better than radical changes like Windows does. So Windows, in my opinion, is just difficult. So quality of interface, 30% failure rate in the GUI, not so cool. Accessibility, nice. You have the graphical interface there. You have the command line if you want to use it. And the overall design for both is reasonable. I know people don't think that's the case with the command line, but let's be honest. You launch the command line, you type in sudo dnf space update, enter. You press the enter key, and you're in business. And if you don't even want to watch, you do a space -y, and it'll go ahead and do all the updates for you. And it will not reboot the system. So you don't have to worry about the system doing a spontaneous reboot. Now, Windows has gotten better on that. Mac is very good on that. And Linux is perfect on that. So I'm actually going to give Linux, in this case, ease of use. I'm kind of between an 8 and a 9. Only because of the failure rate of the graphical interface. But everything else notwithstanding, I'm going to give it a 9 because it actually does allow you multiple methods. Yeah, that's where we want our 9 in the search. Meanwhile, I am going to give it a 9. I decided I was going to go with round numbers. I didn't want to do half numbers, so it's got to be one or the other. And the quality of the interface, the access, and the overall design are good, whether or not you agree. So let's talk about adaptability. How changeable is the user interface? Can you do selective updates? If so, how simple is it to do? How straightforward is it with regard to adaptability? Pretty simple. With Windows, there is some adaptability. We can schedule updates for a certain time. One of the things that really irritates me, and I'm going to bring over my Windows virtual machine. So here we have Windows. If I click on the, looks like my virtual machine is locked up. Anyway, not the fault of Windows. I think it's the fault of the virtual machine. If you click the Windows charm down here and you say, you know what, I've told it to delay updates, for the next 8 hours. So when I'm at work, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. or whatever, I do not want updates. So you decide you're going to go home and you shut down the system. And it always says, well, not always, but often, shut down and install updates, or install updates and shut down. That to me is problematic because, and while we're sitting here, I might as well fire in a reset. And I'll move this back over here and we'll let that reset. The problem I have with that is you have no choice. You have to let it do the updates while it's shutting down. You don't necessarily have to wait, of course, but when it reboots, you may have the finalization of the update installation, which can take anywhere from 10 seconds to several minutes. And that can be problematic if you forgot that particular fact. So I don't feel like it's overly adaptable. You're kind of getting that automation shoved down your throat, like it or not kind of attitude. So can you do selected updates? Yes, you can. So if there's a specific package you want to do an update to, you can do that. Well, I should say KB. Here's the problem with the KBs when you select them. They don't make any sense. Let's see if I can get into my Windows virtual machine. In other words, it doesn't provide you with information that's usable. Case in point, look here on Linux. We are very clear on which one of these packages are being updated. Wine Core, zlib, and they're in alphabetical order. And I can, if I want, select one or more. So I've deselected everything. And I might select one package, add Weta, whatever, QD5. All right, Windows, come on. Let's do system updates. Don't want to check for updates. All right. I guess we don't have any choice. Sigh. Your device is at risk because it's really, really... I haven't run this thing in forever. Okay. Let's just use this as an example. Or this one. Quality updates. 2018-05. Update for Windows 10 version 17.03. I know it's an old version of Windows. Sorry, I don't use it hardly ever. For x64 based systems, KB number, blah, 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 blah. Okay, what is it? A security issue has been identified in a Microsoft software product that could affect your system. Okay, well, this is very vague. I know, I'll click more information. Oh, goodness gracious. Firefox is my default browser. It had to do an update. Provide a notification of an improved privacy experience on upgrade to the Windows 10 April 2018 release. The Windows update provides a notification of an improved privacy experience. Sounds a lot like the title. What the heck? I had to go through all that just to get to the actual information about what this update is about. Why? Why can't we just... Shucks. Have the name of it right here. Why the ambiguity? Here's my theory. They just want you to go ahead and do the updates. That's what I'm thinking. Okay, go away. So, changeable user interface, selective updates. Yeah, you can sort of select updates, but wow, do you have to do a lot of work to get to the point where it shows you what the update is. And again, okay, let's not leave Windows just yet. So I was going to move on to Mac, but adaptability. Oh, Windows. Doggone it. I'm sorry. That's just how I feel about it. All right. Mac adaptability. The user interface is really not that changeable. And that's okay. It's consistent, we can say that. But we're thinking about adaptability here, not ease of use. So that actually is a negative for Mac. Selective updates, yes and no. A lot of times they will just say various updates for iMovie. Sometimes it'll be a single update, but you don't really have much of a choice. Sometimes you have to take the whole kit and caboodle of updates. And one of the things they like to do, which is really annoying to me and I've run into, back when I did use iMovie a couple of times, is that what it's called? Cut. Back in the bad old days when I did use iMovie to edit some of my videos, one of the things that struck me as interesting is when they basically say, you know, iMovie's not going to run anymore until you install the update. And that's kind of harsh. So I don't feel like Mac is really all that adaptable. And when you do selective updates, sometimes they're rammed down your throat. If you want to use that application anymore, you'll be doing the updates. So rare, but it still happens. However, overall, Mac does a pretty nice job, and you can go in and at least look at what updates are there and sort of single out individual updates. But they are very clear on what the update is for. So if you click on the group of updates, I believe sometimes you click on an update and it's a group of updates. You can just install them all, or you click and you can see which updates are there. And I can't remember if you can single out one of the updates. So since I'm talking about it right now, I'll pull up my Mac and record some of the footage and we'll have a look at it. Overall, though, I feel like adaptability, changeable user interface, not really. Selective updates, yes. It's just good enough to pass muster. I'm going to give it a 7, so it's a solid C. Not bad, not the greatest. Changeable user interface and selective updates. This is what Linux does best. It understands, all right, I want to install one package, and it may be with DNF. So, case in point, let's grab the command line, make it larger, sudo DNF install. I don't know if there's a new one. We're about to find out. Firefox. Type in the password. Notice I did not do the -y, because if there is an update, I'm going to say no. Adaptability. Okay, so it told me that individual package is installed. And if I really wanted to, I could have came here and, for example, just select curl Let's turn that one off and only update curl. And I could do that in the graphical interface as well. So the changeable user interface and ability to do selective updates and adaptability in Linux, this is where it's the strongest. So when it comes to adaptability, I've got to give Linux a solid 10. I'm going to put in my 10, or maybe not. I'm going to put in my 10. This is like watching an NFL football game, isn't it? All right. Reliability. Oh, Windows. Windows. You silly operating system. Yeah. Well, this is based on personal experience. I get a solid 90% success rate with reliability on Windows updates. When it comes to major updates, like fall update or spring update, I've had more problems with the large updates than I have with the minor updates where you're just getting several packages like we looked at earlier. So the success of the update process, in my experience, I think I'm being generous by giving it a C. I really do. Mac update, on the other hand, I have only I can remember I've only had one problem, and it was very big. So I did updates to the operating system that I'm on, and version, I should say, which is High Sierra. When I rebooted, I had a kernel panic. I'm not really well versed in what to do at that point with Mac, so I just kind of went, all right, and powered it off and back on 2 more times. On the 3rd time, no kernel panic, and everything's been kosher since. That is the only error I have ever received with Mac updates, whether it's a major OS update or a small package. Now, I know that there can be problems that are not on the surface. You don't see them. You don't know that the issue has come up, and another update will come out and you'll have to do that update. But overall, reliability, I think Mac is outstanding, Mac OS. And I would give it a 10 if not for that one snafu problem that I've had. So I do have to give reliability a 9 to Mac OS. Linux. What are we going to do, Linux? Success of the update process. All right. So, again, 99% of the time, I would say 99.5% of the time, I have no problems whether it's a OS upgrade. And just recently I went from Fedora 28 to Fedora 31. So I skipped 29 and 30. No, I'm sorry. I went from Fedora 28 to Fedora 30. So I skipped 29. Things have went really well. Although I'm having some issues with Kdenlive. I think it's the newer version of Kdenlive. I think it has a regression bug. So I don't think it's really an error of the upgrade process of Fedora, but that particular package. And I'll find out when I do my edit. Anyway, I can't think of any major problems I've had. Now, if you look back in my videos, I might say something like, I destroyed Fedora 26, or Fedora 26 crashed, or Fedora 24 exploded. That is because I decided to do something that I knew full well there was a chance I'd blow it up. So I was doing it to test something, a theory, see how it worked out, whether or not it was good. And so I go ahead and run a particular command or update or delete a package or whatever, and I end up destroying my installation of Fedora. But when I run the regular updates and I do upgrades, I have not had a problem, very rarely had a problem that would keep me from booting up. I would say once or twice in all the time that I've used Linux. So it's good. It's really good, but it's not great. Well, I shouldn't say that. It is great, but it's not perfect. Now, I'm talking about updates for Fedora in particular, but in Linux, my experience with Ubuntu and Debian and Arch, I had great success doing updates, and I cannot think of any problems I had with any of those operating systems. Linux Mint, all of them seem to do excellent. So if I were to add it all up, and we're going with whole numbers here, it's almost a 10 more than it is a 9. But, you know, with reliability with the Mac, one problem got it a 9 because it's just not perfect. Well, Linux isn't perfect either. So we have a 9. Okay, I know what you're saying. Duh, Mark. I knew you were going to go ahead and say Linux is the best. I did not plan this in advance, so I'm going to save this. I actually thought out, as we walked along each of these categories, which one I personally felt for each category did best. So this was not pre-planned. 1 point higher than Mac. They're basically the same. So Mac's update usability, the process, automation, adaptability is quite good. The adaptability is, I think, where it got hurt a little bit. But quite frankly, for a walled garden, 40 points, I think is really, really good out of 50. Not bad. 90 out of 100. So a solid A minus. Linux, just slightly better. Now, it's really weak in some areas. The update method, you know, single-threaded, automation, But the ease of use, the adaptability, which is huge, and the reliability, I think is completely underestimated. Windows, oh boy, 66 out of 100, so 66%, which is, you know, a D+. I think it's horrible. I think in all the areas it's average or below average. So Microsoft, you've got some work to do on your update process and your software. It should be easier. Case in point, let's drag Windows over here again. Where is it? Failed to install, failed to install, failed to install. Why? Why did it fail to install? I don't know. It did though. So now it's busy downloading updates. Great. Active hours, restart options. Now what if I click the Windows charm now and don't laugh. I forgot how to do shutdown. Click power. Okay, I still could shut down right now. I think I'm going to let it do the updates. I've only given it 2 cores, 2 threads, if you will. So I don't see that it's going to be an issue, but I don't know. This interface, I don't like it. They want feedback. Not my job. You are giving us an operating system people pay for. You should have plenty of beta testers who give you plenty of information, and 33, 66%, a D+, you're not really doing well. Mac, 80 out of 100, a solid B. it's a good program. It works well. Linux, 82%, so kind of a B-ish, B+, slightly better. Not particularly perfect, but slightly better than Mac. I'm very curious to hear the scores you would give each of these OSs. You don't necessarily have to give me all the individual scores. You can if you want, but just give me a bottom line score and tell me why. Reliability, you know, if you really wanted to, you could pull this down to an 8, because in my experience, it has been less reliable than Mac, and Windows, you know, is the least reliable. So I think this is more a fair assessment. So really, we've got a tie. Mac is, in my opinion, and I've done many updates, major OS updates, several minor updates to different applications. They've always worked, except for that one time. But hey, it fixed itself in the end, didn't it? So kudos to you. Apple, whatever. Windows, meh. I think this is more accurate. Let's go with this. 33 for Windows, 40 for Mac, 40 for Linux, a solid B, 80% out of 100. Not too shabby. A few changes in the Mac update process. Remember, subtle changes, not revolutionary changes like Windows does. And I really feel like Mac could easily overtake Linux, which Linux is reasonable. But it had some weak areas. Automation is atrocious. It's equal in ease of use. Adaptability is beautiful. Not so much with Mac. We talked about why. Reliability, well, Mac beat them. Beat them all. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe. I want to say thank you very much to all my Patreon members. I'm going to put the screen up right now. And although I don't have many Patreon members, I don't care. I appreciate every single one of you and all the stuff that you do to help out the channel, including not just your patronage, but also your comments. Andrew Webster, I got your comment recently. I always appreciate that stuff. I like to see my patrons pop in and drop a comment. I really enjoy that. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. This video was made possible with support from viewers like you. If you find this video useful, consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/FastGadgets.